The night my mother-in-law stood up at the Caldwell family's 50th anniversary gala and announced, in front of 200 guests, that the legacy of this company would only ever belong to those who carried the Caldwell name in their blood, she was looking directly at me. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She raised her champagne flute toward my husband's cousins, toward his sister, toward every member of that family seated at the long table draped in white linen and gold centerpieces, and she said the words like, "A verdict." I sat at the far end of that table and I did not move. I held my glass. I kept my face exactly still. And I thought about the folder sitting in my attorney's briefcase, 12 blocks away, in a building my mother-in-law had never once stepped inside. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Sophie, and I married into the Caldwell family 6 years ago when I was 28 years old. My husband, Daniel, was the second son, the quiet one, the one who studied literature instead of business, the one his mother had always privately considered a disappointment until he started dating me, and she found something new to be disappointed about. I was not from money. My father ran a small accounting firm in Columbus, Ohio. My mother taught elementary school. I had paid for my own graduate degree in finance, worked 18-hour days at a private equity firm in Chicago for 5 years before I ever met Daniel at a mutual friend's dinner party, and by the time we got married, I had built a very quiet, very private investment portfolio that I told almost no one about. I say almost no one because I did tell Daniel. On our third date, actually. I believe in honesty in the things that matter. Daniel told his mother none of it, which I understood. His mother, my mother-in-law, operated on a simple principle. The Caldwell family built something, and outsiders married into it, and those were two entirely different categories of human being. She had been born a Caldwell herself, the founder's granddaughter, and she had married a man who took the Caldwell name, and she had raised her children to understand that the name was not just a name, it was a bloodline, it was a standard, it was a wall. She was pleasant to my face for the first year, politely distant, the kind of woman who compliments your dress in a tone that makes you feel underdressed. By year 2, the pleasantness had thinned. By year 3, she had stopped pretending. She began referring to me in conversations I wasn't supposed to hear as Daniel's wife, never by name, never as her daughter-in-law, always with that slight pause before wife that made it sound like a category rather than a relationship. At Christmas, she would hand out envelopes to her children, and her sister's children, and her husband's nephew, and she would hand me a gift card to a spa she had clearly never researched, because it had closed 8 months prior. At the Caldwell Hotel's board dinners, which I attended as Daniel's spouse, seated beside him, speaking to no one who didn't speak to me first, she would steer conversations away from business the moment I showed interest. Once, her sister leaned across the table and asked me what I did, and before I could answer, my mother-in-law said, "Sophie keeps herself busy," and moved the conversation elsewhere. I kept myself busy. What I actually did, in the mornings before Daniel woke up, and in the hours after he fell asleep, and in the lunch breaks I took alone at my desk in the home office, she thought was just for appearances, was manage a portfolio worth just over $40 million, quietly, through an LLC registered in Delaware under a name that had nothing to do with me. I want to explain something, because I think it matters. I did not plan what eventually happened. I did not marry into the Caldwell family as some kind of long game. I married Daniel because I loved him, and I still do. What happened was not a plan. It was an opportunity that presented itself because someone in that family was careless, and because I had spent 10 years being the kind of person who was always, quietly, prepared. 4 years ago, Caldwell Hotels nearly collapsed. It didn't make the news in any significant way. The family was careful about that. But the third quarter numbers that year were catastrophic. An overextended renovation project on their flagship property in Miami had gone 40% over budget, a new location in Denver had opened into a market that immediately softened, and a lawsuit from a former executive had frozen one of their primary operating accounts for 11 weeks during peak booking season. The family called an emergency board meeting. I know this because Daniel told me about it that night, sitting on the edge of our bed, rubbing his face with both hands, saying that his mother was talking about bringing in an outside investor and that she was furious about it. "How much do they need?" I asked. "Somewhere between 30 and 40 million, he said. "Maybe more." I was quiet for a moment. "Are they talking to anyone specific?" I asked. "Not yet." My mother is trying to avoid it. She says outside investors mean outside opinions, and she won't have strangers telling her family how to run what her grandfather built. I nodded. I told him I was sorry. I told him to get some sleep. The next morning, I called my attorney. I want to be precise about this because precision matters. I did not lend the Caldwell family money. I did not show up at the board meeting and write a check. What I did was structure a private acquisition through my holding company, a company that, on paper, had no connection to me or to any Caldwell family member of a 38% equity stake in the Caldwell Hotel's parent entity, at a valuation that was, given the circumstances, extremely favorable to me. The family's attorney found my holding company through a discreet intermediary. The terms were presented as a private equity rescue, capital injection, no operational interference, full equity stake with standard governance rights, 5-year minimum hold period. My mother-in-law never asked who was behind the holding company. She asked her attorney if the terms were fair. He told her they were better than fair. She signed. I watched Daniel's relief when he came home that evening and told me they had found a solution. I told him I was glad. I made dinner. We watched television. I said nothing. I have thought about that silence many times in the years since. Whether it was wrong. Whether I owed him the full truth in that moment. I have made peace with the fact that I was protecting something, not a secret so much as a boundary. What I had built was mine, and I had learned, in 6 years inside that family, that anything I claimed as mine had a way of being reclassified. The years after the rescue were, for the Caldwell family, a recovery. The Miami property reopened and performed well. The Denver location stabilized. My mother-in-law resumed her position at the head of the family in the way she always had, with the absolute certainty of someone who had never seriously questioned their own authority. She did not become warmer toward me. If anything, she became slightly more pointed. As if the crisis and its resolution had reminded her that the family had survived things, and surviving things was a Caldwell trait, and I remained outside that category. At Daniel's 40th birthday dinner, she gave a toast to the Caldwells who have always held this family together. She listed names. Mine was not among them, Daniel noticed. He reached under the table and held my hand. I smiled and raised my glass. At my sister-in-law's engagement party the following spring, my mother-in-law pulled me aside near the end of the evening. She was 2 glasses of wine past her usual precision, and she said to me, in a voice that was almost kind, almost maternal, that she hoped I understood that the Caldwell legacy was something the family took seriously. I know, I said. What Daniel's grandfather built, she said, was for family. Real family. I just want to make sure we're always clear about what that means. I looked at her for a moment. We're very clear, I said. I excused myself and went to find my husband. That was 8 months before the gala. The 50th anniversary of Caldwell Hotels was the kind of event the family had been planning for 2 years. Black tie, 200 guests, the grand ballroom of the flagship property in Charleston, which my mother-in-law had specifically chosen because her grandfather had opened it in 1975, and it was, in her words, where the story had really begun. The family flew in from 4 states. There were cousins I had met once at a funeral. There were board members and longtime employees and a journalist from a regional business magazine who was writing a profile of the family for their anniversary issue. I wore a black dress. I sat beside Daniel. I smiled at the right moments. My mother-in-law had arranged the seating so that I was at the far end of the family table, beside an elderly uncle who had significant hearing loss, and spent most of dinner telling me about his fishing cabin in Montana. I listened carefully. I asked good questions. I was genuinely interested in the fishing cabin. The speeches began after the main course. My father-in-law spoke first, briefly, the way he always did, a few words about gratitude and hard work, warm and unremarkable. Then my mother-in-law stood up. She was good at this. She had always been good at rooms. She had the posture of someone who had spent decades being the most important person present, and the voice that came with it measured, warm, carrying. She spoke about her grandfather, about what he had sacrificed, about the early years in Charleston before the family had expanded north and west. She spoke about legacy with the particular intensity of someone who believes in it the way other people believe in religion. And then she turned, as I said, and she looked directly at me. Not for long, Just a beat. Just enough. The Caldwell legacy, she said, belongs to the Caldwells, to those who carry this family forward in their name, in their blood, in the way they show up for one another when it matters. This company has survived because the people who love it have always been willing to protect it. And I know it will survive because those people are in this room tonight. She lifted her glass to the family. The room applauded. Daniel did not applaud. He sat very still beside me, and I could feel the particular quality of his stillness, the way he went quiet when he was deciding something. Under the table, I put my hand over his. "It's all right," I said quietly. "It's not," he said. "I know," I said, "but it will be." He looked at me. I don't think he understood what I meant, not fully, but he nodded. That night, back in our hotel room, while Daniel slept, I sat at the desk near the window with my laptop open and a glass of water I hadn't touched. I pulled up my portfolio management software. I looked at the Caldwell Hotel's equity position, 38%, now worth considerably more than what I had paid for it, given 4 years of recovery and growth. I opened a message thread with my attorney. "I'm ready to move," I wrote. "Let's talk tomorrow." He responded within minutes, even at that hour, because he was the kind of attorney I paid to be available. Full exit or restructure? I thought about it for a moment. "Restructure," I wrote. "I want governance rights activated, full board seat, and I want the notification to come from the holding company directly, standard corporate correspondence. No personal connection disclosed yet. Timeline? 2 weeks," I wrote. "After the anniversary coverage runs." I closed the laptop. I went to sleep. I want to be clear about why I waited those 2 weeks. It was not cruelty. I had no interest in spoiling the anniversary or humiliating my mother-in-law in front of the journalist whose profile wouldn't run until the following month anyway. What I wanted was for the story to exist first, the story of the Caldwell family's resilience, their 50 years, their legacy, so that what came next would be understood in the right context. The context being, they had already been saved once. And by whom? The notification went out on a Thursday morning. A formal letter from Hartwell Capital Partners, my holding company, to the Caldwell Hotel's board of directors, informing them that per the terms of the original equity agreement, the 5-year hold period would conclude in 30 days, at which point Hartwell Capital intended to exercise its full governance rights, including the right to appoint a board representative. My mother-in-law called Daniel at 9:15 that morning. I was sitting across from him at the kitchen table when his phone rang. I watched him look at the screen, look at me, and answer. I could hear her voice from where I was sitting, not the words, the register. He said very little. He said yes several times. He said, "I understand." He said, "I'll ask her." He lowered the phone and looked at me. "She wants to know if you know anything about a company called Hartwell Capital Partners." I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug. "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a long moment. "Sophie, it was 4 years ago," I said. "You told me they needed between 30 and 40 million. They needed it quietly and quickly and without a Caldwell name attached to the rescue because your mother couldn't bear the optics. I had it. I structured it so that no one would have to know. Why didn't you tell me? Because if I had told you, you would have told her. And if she had known it was me, she would have refused it. You know that." He sat very still. "She's going to say you did this to hurt her," he said. "I know. Did you?" I looked at my husband, at the person I had chosen and who had chosen me, who had held my hand under tables and gone still in hotel chairs, and driven home from family dinners in a silence that said everything he couldn't say out loud. "I did this," I said, "because I could, because no one else was going to, and because I had spent years watching your family decide what I was worth, and I had the opportunity to let them find out on their own terms." He nodded slowly. "Are you angry?" I asked. "No," he said. "I think I've been waiting for this." The board meeting was held the following week. My mother-in-law had spent those 7 days attempting to identify a buyer for the Hartwell Capital stake, someone who could purchase it before the governance rights were activated, and before whoever was behind the holding company could appear in person at a board meeting. Her attorney had made 3 calls. None of them resulted in a serious offer. 38% of Caldwell hotels at a fair valuation was, in the current market, a significant acquisition, and the timeline was too compressed for anyone to move cleanly. She arrived at the boardroom on a Tuesday morning and found me already seated at the table. I had chosen a chair near the center, not at the head, that was not the point. Near the center, where a board member would sit, where someone with standing would sit. I was wearing a gray suit I had bought in Chicago 7 years ago, before I met Daniel, when I was still just myself and no one's wife and no one's disappointment. She stopped in the doorway. I looked at her steadily. "Good morning," I said. The room filled slowly. The other board members, 3 of them, longtime family allies, took their seats with the careful neutrality of people who had read the correspondence and understood, at least in outline, what was happening and did not want to be on the wrong side of it. My mother-in-law sat down. She placed her hands flat on the table. "I want to understand," she said, "how this was done without anyone knowing." "It was done," I said, "through a standard private equity structure. The terms were presented to your attorney, reviewed, and signed. The identity of the capital source is disclosed in the original agreement if you read the beneficial ownership appendix." I paused. "Most people don't read the appendix." "You were in my home," she said. "You were at my table. You were sitting at my family's anniversary dinner last week." "I was," I said. "I have been at your table for 6 years." She was quiet. "You said the Caldwell legacy belongs to people who show up when it matters," I said. "I showed up 4 years ago with $38 million when no one else could, or would, in the timeline you needed. I asked for nothing publicly. I took the standard terms. I kept the company solvent through the Miami rebuild and the Denver stabilization and the lawsuit settlement." I looked at her directly. I showed up. The silence in that room was a different quality than the silence at the Gala. At the Gala, the silence had been the sound of a room listening to someone they respected. Here, it was the sound of a room recalibrating. "What do you want?" she said. "A board seat," I said. "Standard governance rights. Transparency in reporting to the equity holders, which now includes me formally rather than informally. That's all." "That's all," she repeated. "I'm not here to take anything from anyone," I said. "I am here because I have been a part of this family and this company for 6 years, and I would like that to be acknowledged in a way that is accurate." She looked at me for a long moment. I did not look away. She did not respond. She gathered her materials at the end of the meeting. She walked out of the room without speaking again, her back straight, her posture exactly as it always was, the posture of someone who had never seriously questioned their own authority. I stayed at the table for a moment after the room had emptied. I looked at the empty chairs. I looked at the centerpiece someone had placed at the middle of the table, white flowers, very simple. I thought about my father in his accounting office in Columbus. I thought about the fishing cabin in Montana. I thought about all the gift cards to spas that had closed, and all the toasts that ended before my name, and all the dinners where I had sat quietly and kept my face still and thought about the folder in my attorney's briefcase. Then I gathered my things and I walked out into the hallway where Daniel was waiting. He had not been in the meeting. I had not asked him to be. This was mine. He looked at me when I came through the door. "How did it go?" he asked. "Fine," I said. He searched my face for something for drama maybe, or for damage. I don't think he found either. "She's going to need time," he said. "She can have it," I said. We walked out together through the lobby of the building, past the front desk and the revolving door, and into the gray morning air of the city. He took my hand. I let him. I didn't think about whether she would come around. I didn't think about reconciliation or dinners or Christmas envelopes or any of the years of small exclusions and careful distances. I thought about those things the way you think about a chapter that has ended with clarity and without grief. What I thought about, walking to the car in the gray morning, was the next board meeting, the Q3 projections. The proposed expansion into 2 new markets that I had already been studying for 8 months on my own, privately, at my desk in the home office she thought was just for appearances. The Caldwell Hotels board had a new member. She happened to be the person who had kept the company alive. And she was very, very good at her job.